It's the November 2023 show with Lori from Purposefully Unplugged. Lori, a couple questions. In the news lately, we've just seen lots of negative stuff. And on the cover of this month hub, the November hub, it just says peace. I think, Remembrance Day is coming around the corner. Just a lot of conflicts in the world, and it can really add up on a person. Even though it's not directly affecting us, but it does add to us. And I know in my life, I'm just tired of seeing it. Let's just get along. We need to listen, don't we?
Mm-hmm. And that's actually part of our topic. That's what I thought we could talk about today. That in the midst of the struggle and in the midst of what we're seeing around us, if we just stop and put some attention to listening to each other, and I'll link that back to kind of my work and what I do. But for sure, I appreciate that peace and just listening are the basis of what you and I are going to talk about today.
Well, let's get into it. Let's talk listening.
Mm-hmm. So often, Dave, when people come to see me, they're telling me things and they'll say, I've never said this to anyone before, or I don't feel safe to say this to anyone before, or I've said the same thing to the people in my life over and over and over and no one's listening. So part of this therapy component is really just having a space to listen and be heard and really be validated for what's happening in your life.
Why do we turn that off? Like that last one where you said, I've said this over and over again and people aren't listening, is why do we, as someone that should be listening, why do we turn that off?
Mm-hmm. Actually, this has cropped up a couple times as we've done these podcasts. I mean, sometimes people will just have an emotional reaction that shuts that off, where they can't listen, don't want to listen, frustrated at listening. And it's really a trait about couples, families, parents as they talk with kids. This really transcends lots of different situations. But literally listening with the intent to hear someone versus listening with the intent to solve a problem. And I think that's come up in other podcasts as well.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, and just how communication breaks down when, if I'm sitting here playing on my phone and you're talking to me, I'm not really paying much attention, am I?
Mm-hmm. Well, divided attention, and it's what our society is doing at this point. So it is very frustrating. Even if you're out for dinner, see people having dinner and they're both on their phones. Within the same house, parents texting kids and kids texting parents within the same house. So those are the things that come up in therapy here. And we really just look at different solutions. So what would it take for you to have 5 minutes with your partner each day without your phones in front of you? And I see magnificent things happen when people start communicating and paying attention to each other with no technology around.
We just get lazy, don't we? Like, it's so easy just to text somebody rather than walk upstairs or downstairs and say, hey, what are you doing? It speaks, and I think that speaks more to the world problems too, really. It's just lack of proper communication and understanding each other and what's going on in the world with all these conflicts. Like it boils down to communication and listening, doesn't it? And all those aspects, really.
Well, and recently I've talked a lot about communication as the receiver and the sender, the message we are sending versus the way it is received, and the perception versus what was actually said. So those are conversations that are coming up all the time, and really just sitting and thinking. But the listening part, I mean, I welcome and invite people as we're coming into, like you said, Remembrance Day. And then right behind that is the winter holiday. So really, I challenge people, just sit and listen to the people in your lives. Hear the stories, glean from the stories and just check back. So is this what you mean? What are you feeling? What does that look like for you? And just clarify that back.
I was just going to say that, because that's the big part, is what you may tell me, my perception of what you're saying may be different from what you're saying altogether. So without clarification, I may walk away going, oh, she believes this, not really understanding the full conversation. And so you're saying basically clarify if you're not sure, or make sure you're taking it the right way, right? Because that's another thing with miscommunication, is people take it the wrong way. If you're trying to help them, but it comes across as you're being, demanding, I guess, right? And you're not trying to be that way, but I guess that perception is altered, isn't it?
hmm It can be, and in lots of situations, it is. Sometimes people are in these patterns for years. Sometimes people are just new to these patterns. Regardless, it's always good to sit back, look at our patterning, and just really shift a little bit. But it has to start with our own energy. We can't expect everyone else to kind of solve their issue first. We need to really look at our energy, how we're approaching something, and listening and just being open and aware around listening is probably a good place to start.
You mentioned patterns too, and I think that's another area we could get deep into, because I think if I'm used to doing something in a routine that's a pattern that works for me, but I'm not opening myself up to other conversations, that's dangerous.
hmm Well, our patterns kind of sometimes get us in a corner and we feel
Right.
comfortable, we feel justified, we then make judgments based on that. So, again, part of this communication and listening piece is open yourself up to as many conversations, get as many perspectives as you can, and really talk these things through. So, when we think of what COVID and kind of how we have all pulled away a little bit, and some of us haven't reached back out, and like you said, maybe it's not a phone call or actually sitting down with someone, maybe we're just texting them. So when we're thinking about communicating and listening, maybe it's shifting the way we've been reaching out to each other. And maybe this is a good time to think about that as the year wraps up.
Yeah, there's so many pieces there I want to unpack, but and I know I can't keep you much longer, but can you give us an example of a tool you could use to maybe look outside your pattern, or to re-establish communication? Like, is there something you can do to reset?
Honestly, it's got to start with your own self awareness. I mean, we really have to step back, take a look at our own responses. So, self awareness and really looking at how we're responding and why, looking at ourselves first. So, self awareness is foundational. But then, when we're actually listening, maybe it's slowing down, making eye contact, something as simple as making eye contact, and then really sitting down and listening. Most times our brain is already trying to solve the problem or move on to what's next. Maybe it's slowing down. That's maybe part of your peace piece, that just slow things down, breathe a little bit, make some eye contact, and start communicating and listening to each other.
And now we're down the rabbit hole. So can I assume then, when a conversation is happening and I'm not paying attention as much as I should, and I'm trying to reset that, like you said, make eye contact, focus on what you're doing,
Mhm.
I feel sometimes like maybe I'm taking on that person's problem and I don't want it.
Mhm. Nor can we carry each other's problems sometimes.
Right.
There's a reason, there's a place for that, but sometimes it's really taking a look at where are we? What do I need to cope right now? What's best in this situation? Listen to what the other person needs, and just assisting them to kind of discover that as well. And so you're right, there's lots of complications, there's lots of ways this can go.
Right. And I think maybe if you feel that way, and then you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but
Mhm.
maybe that person just needs you to say something semi-positive, in the way that, like, well, what do you think you should do? Right. Like, to
Mhm.
bring it back to that responsibility part. Is that an okay thing to do to people?
hmm Or things like, what's another alternative? Is there a different way to
Right.
look at this? I'm
Right.
curious how that comes together for you. I'm observing and listening, and I wonder, is this a possibility? So there's lots of ways to do that. And when you're talking this kind of language, this is really mindfulness language instead
Right.
of judgmental language. It's really mindfulness language, and that's always a helpful place to start.
That's pretty cool. I appreciate you taking the time today to talk to me about
hmm
these things. And again, with Remembrance Day,
hmm
folks, pay your respects. Get out
hmm
there and support all these folks we've lost over the years, and all these different conflicts. It's important that we do take that day to take the time to remember, isn't it?
hmm Remember, and again, I'll add, listen, many of our families have had people who have served in different components of those wars and even in civilian acts. So maybe just listen to our families as well. Are there things you could learn? And are there stories you could hear if we slow that down and listen and ask as well?
Thanks for doing this, Laurie. It's great to see you in the outdoors. I know the season's kind of winding down a little bit, but like I said earlier, if you put on a skidoo suit, we can do them outdoors all winter. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it.
Absolutely, you are right.
Take care.
Take care.